We are. Nikki, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. You have been such an influential teacher and just connected so many important dots in my life, as with so many others. So I just want to say what a privilege it is to have you on here.
I love it. Thank you for asking me. As soon as I saw anything with your name on it, it's an automatic yes, right? An automatic yes, I'm here. So I'm delighted to be here with you and just to see your sweet face again.
Oh, that means the world to me. And for all the amazing things I could say, I love the way you give your introduction. So can I ask you to introduce yourself?
I would be happy to. And this is the way I introduce myself, no matter pretty much in any context, any particular work or context that I'm speaking in. And always the running joke was I always say, I don't care if I'm speaking at Harvard Medical School, I would introduce myself the same way. And then a little over 3 years ago, I actually spoke at Harvard Medical School and I got the chance to introduce myself that way. And that was it was really great. It was really great to see that in fulfillment. So I'm Nikki, and I am an MBA. I am the founder of an organization called Y12SR, which is the Yoga 12-Step Recovery. I am a Somatic Experiencing Practitioner, which is this trauma healing methodology. And the big 3-letter word is and, right? And I love this. And I'm an addict, I'm an alcoholic, I'm a codependent, I'm the survivor of both childhood and adult sexual trauma. I am a former commercial sex worker. I am another aunt. I'm the mother of 2 living and 1 deceased child. I'm the grandmother of 5, and now the great grandmother of 3.5. I got another one, another great grandchild on the way. I love that, right? And, I am a lover of life. I love people, and I love all things dogs and nature and all of that. And I love saying all of that in the same sentence. I love saying all that in the same sentence. And the whole idea of that is that when, I set up one piece of myself as bad, awful, and wrong, and another piece of myself as right and wonderful and praiseworthy, right? What happens is that there's a split inside, right? There's a fissure in my whole being, right? And what happens is I become so disintegrated, I become so fragmented, and I end up leaving fragments of myself out here, there, and everywhere, all these things. And what I discovered in this walk toward sustainable recovery is that part of the big healing process in addiction and trauma, healing those things, is this reintegration process, right? This reintegrating all parts of myself, right, into a way of wholeness, right? Moving toward wholeness through reintegration. And it's been a very, 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 really, I want to say critical journey toward wholeness, this piece of reintegrating all parts of myself. And I love that. I love that. I'm always reminded of, you usually say the older I get, the more my favorite movies are Pixar cartoons, right? But the one that reminds me of this, and I was blown away when I first saw it, was the Pixar movie Inside Out, right? And it's this animated thing where it shows that we're all of these things. And it's only when we, through acceptance, through honor, through all of those things, reintegrate all parts of ourselves, right? And heal the split that's inside of us, right? That we have an opportunity to move toward a greater sense of wholeness in our being. And that's been the journey. That's been the journey.
That is so powerful. And that's one of the things There are so many things from your trainings that really stick out to me and are in my journals. And that use of the word "and" really sticks out to me, and how effortless you make it sound when you deliver it, but it's so hard and it's so easy, especially now. It's so easy to pick and choose and carefully curate so the sides of ourselves that we present and feel that are, worthy of being seen. And so I wonder if you could share more about your recovery journey and how you arrived at this place of acceptance and integration.
Absolutely. Right. So it's been, like you say, it may sound simple, right? But
Yeah.
as we say, it definitely ain't easy, right? It may sound simple. And it's been years of this. Um, I came into recovery first in 1987. And prior to that, it was all that part of the "and" that I talked about before. There was domestic violence. There was, well, suffice it, to jails, institutions, and death, right? All of that as a part of that. And the death was really, not only in the experience of the death of so many, right, in this pandemic of overdose and all of those kinds of things. Witty, wonderful, amazing souls that have left this plane of existence as a result of, some kind of overdose or something related to, particularly most in this case, substance, right, abuse or substance disorder. And so it was all that. And it was also the death of my own soul, right? When I walked into rooms, 12 steps, of course, is a huge part of my healing, right? And I walked into 12-step room in 1987, like we speak about, totally spiritually bankrupt, right? And really, I remember this as not being able really to put a sentence together very well, right? And there were people there that really did love me till I could learn how to love myself. And for that, I am eternally grateful, eternally grateful. And so my first 8 years of recovery, right, were many things, many things. It was, reclaiming my children. My children had been separated from me and all of that. So it was this piece of reclaiming pieces. I went back to school and I ended up, that was when I finished my undergrad degree, and I went on to go to the MBA. And I always speak about that because I finished the undergrad degree with straight A's, right? And then I finished the MBA with 1 B, right? I always say I still got a little resentment with that teacher that gave me that B, but I'm over it now. I'm kind of over that, right? But still, and the only reason I really point that out is because cognitively, there were some things that were coming back, right? Yet at a level of work, there were some things that were missing, right? I went into this process of thinking that most of it was external, right? If I got the degree, if I got the car back, if I got the house back, if I got all those things back, that in some kind of way, that was going to be proof again that I was a good person, right? That all that other stuff was, and I pushed that part of myself away, right? That all of those things. And so I'm in recovery in the rooms of 12-step program, and I got this great job and all of this stuff. And long story short, after 8 years clean, I ended up in relapse. And the relapse piece of this, that piece in particular, is kind of interesting to know, because I was when I relapsed, I was in Germany. The company I was working for sent me over to Germany, right? And I arrived there hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. And then I had done these other things. I'd been working a lot. I moved from the community that really was so supportive in my recovery healing. I moved away from there. So several things were going on. And I end up in Germany on this business trip, and I ended up drinking, right? I ended up drinking. And I always tell the story because that night I had this, what happened was there was a mini bar in the room, and I drank out of that mini bar. You know, I always say, just like Denzel Washington drank at the end of the movie, I drank everything. I hadn't had a drink or drug in my body for 8 years. Right. And then in that night, I drank the whole mini bar. And then I got up the next day and I was supposed to fly out like 3 days later. I drank through the whole trip. But instead of flying back to Boston where I was living, I chose to fly to Amsterdam. Right? And in Amsterdam, you know, this is the reason I tell this story. I morphed back into the same person I have been 8 years ago, right? I knew exactly how to talk. I knew exactly where to go. I knew exactly who to become in order to find my real drug of choice, which wasn't alcohol, in order to find my real drug in a foreign freaking country, right? Wow. And that so that pattern, right? As we say in yoga, that's samskara, right? That pattern and conditioning is there, right? And I never want to forget that again. I never want to forget. Maybe for Buddha or Jesus or somebody like that, the pattern goes away. But I'm real clear that that's not me. I'm not at that elevated state. I'm the one that's got to keep coming back, right? I'm the one that needs to do that because that is still there, right? And so then I make it back in the rooms. And that was when I found you all reunited with yoga, right? And, you know, and I get on this yoga trip. And then I decide that, you know, I don't need 12-step anymore. I just need yoga. And so 4 years after the relapse from 8 years, 4 years later, I relapse again. Right? And by this time, I'm like blown away. I'm like, WTF, right? You know, what is going, because I knew I was smart, right? I got all these great grades and doing all this stuff in the world. And it just once again proved to me in my own lived experience is that, you know, addiction is more than the cognitive, right? It's more than the cognitive. And, you know, what I found in yoga, I tried to have yoga replace many of the things and the physical practice in particular. And what I discovered was, at least for someone like me, right, that these things needed to be deeply coupled together, right? It is true from everything I know and studied and know, the issues really do live in our tissues, right? So there is this way to cognitively and somatically connect these things that for many offers a deeper level of healing or is supportive of a deeper level of healing. And it was after that Y12SR was real, after that second relapse, that Y12SR was born, right? And that's what it is, this coupling of the cognitive and the somatic pieces.
I love that so much. Yeah, the way you have woven together all these different pieces, the yoga philosophy, the 12 steps, and also neuroscience and trauma healing. It's like this big tapestry that is Y12SR. Can you speak a little bit about that? What some of the similarities are of the path of yoga and the 12 steps? Because there definitely is some crossover, but also in what ways that they complement each other and why they couldn't necessarily stand alone.
Absolutely. Part of it is that big thing. And I love that you brought in the whole piece, right? The neuroscience and the trauma healing. And that's what we talk about Y12SR as. Hopefully it becomes a platform for sustainable recovery, right? A whole framework for sustainable recovery. One thing I didn't say when I was telling that story that I'm very grateful to be able to say right now it's been 21 years now since the last relapse, right? And for me, yay,
Wow. Let's just take a moment to acknowledge that.
I know,
That is
I know.
incredible.
One day at a time, still one day at a time. And it's been 21 years since that last relapse. And for me, part of, and like I've seen over the course of these years and working with hundreds and hundreds of people over the course of these years, I've seen it the same way for many, that there is this piece in this framework that we can develop that truly can support sustainable recovery, right? It truly is an opportunity to support sustainable recovery. And the framework is the kind of the four things that we were just mentioning, right? It's yoga philosophy and practices. It's 12 steps or cognitive work, right? And the cognitive work I most relate to, right? And I've done plenty, all the CBT, and all of those kinds of things, right? All many other different things. But the work that I relate most to, which is why we call this Y12SR, is the 12-step work, right? And for many reasons, the 12 steps are brilliant from my perspective. They're freaking brilliant, right? And it's free, basically free. They'll tell you, put $1 in the basket if you got $1, and you're more important than your money. And that phrase has always meant so much to me. You are more important than your money. So it's a platform that's available to all. You don't have to have big money or a lot of resource in order to access that. And that's really important to me. So Y12SR is wrapped around the brilliance of the 12 steps. It is also deeply embedded with trauma healing, right? I assert that what sits under any addiction is some unresolved, unfinished, incomplete level of trauma in our being, right? And that becomes so painful that I want to use something, right? I'm looking to, get relief for something. And one of the things we talk about in Y12SR all the time is there's a big distinction between relief and resolve, that those are two different things. And we get those confused. We get confused with those things. And the last one is, what neurobiology, right? The neuroscience and what really is going on with addiction and the brain, right? And all of those things. So by looking at those and how ultimately a lot of this comes in befriending our brain, really knowing what's going on and befriending our brain, right? And when we can do that, that can support us in sustainable recovery. And there's so much in the Yoga Sutras and in yoga philosophy that so coincides. One of the Yoga Sutras that we always talk about in Y12SR, we almost say that it's the foundation for everything that we do in Y12SR. The sutra is Yoga Sutra 216, right? And it says Sthira Sukha Asanam, right? Which, that's not, I'm sorry. Heya Dukkha Anagatam. I was thinking ahead of myself there. Heya Dukkha Anagatam, right? Which means future suffering can be avoided, right? Future suffering can be avoided. And I love that. My experience with relapse was suffering, right? And that's a suffering that I no longer want to go toward. Future suffering can be avoided, right? So we kind of frame that as, the overall goal, if you will, of intention to avoid future suffering, avoid suffering of relapse and all that. And I love that as a framework for everything, right? And then there's so many others in so many ways. If you look at the spiritual principles of which the purpose for working the steps is really, from my perspective and what I know from lived experience and study, the real purpose is to walk in the principles that sit underneath the steps, right? And the spiritual principles are things like acceptance, honesty, open-mindedness and willingness, surrender, right? All of those spiritual principles that said, when we can embody those in our lives, that's the reason we work the steps, right? We don't work the steps just for working steps' sake. We work so we can embody these in our lives. And the question becomes, what does it mean to embody something? What does it mean to really walk in that? And that's where yoga can be supremely helpful, right? That's one of the ways. There are many, but that's one of the ways that I love, that I think can be so helpful. We tell people, in program, we'll use this phrase, keep coming back, right? And the question becomes, what does that mean? Does it just mean coming back to meetings? Is that what that is, right? And we look at how a pose on the mat, like mountain pose, in that sense of steadiness and stability in our being, and inviting in, once we're steady and stable, to invite in a sense of ease, like in the posture mountain pose. That's what I want to keep coming back to, right? When I go, out in the future, which I always am, or in the past, which I always am, not present, I can keep coming back, right? I can keep coming back to that sense of steadiness and support, groundedness in my being. Then I'm present, right? I'm in present time, right? When I'm in the future or the past, I'm not even here. I'm not present, right? And so I can practice that, and that's what it really means, coming back to the present moment. I can keep coming back to that. When I'm, when I'm in Starbucks or wherever it is, and I'm not getting my latte, when I think I ought to have my latte, and I start going, right? I can keep coming back, right? I can remind myself to keep coming back, right? And there are all these things like that. All of those spiritual principles have a felt sense associated with them. And because of that, I can know whether I'm in them or out of them. I can know whether I've gone south, right? And so to be aware of that, which is one of the big spiritual principles in the steps, is awareness, right? Once I'm aware of that, then I can use tools, right? Oh, I've gone south. Maybe I should call somebody right now, right? Maybe, right? Maybe it's time to go to a meeting. Maybe, right? What tools can I use to keep coming back to center? To keep coming, and I go off all the time, right? But it's a matter of, what do I need to do to keep coming back, right? What tool is available for me to keep coming back, right? Because when I'm in the present moment, I have access to the wisdom to know the difference, right? If I'm not here, I can't even gain access to the wisdom to know the difference, right? Right? I love this. I love it.
Absolutely. And, all this has me thinking about the last couple of years and, how valuable it is to have these tools in a time like we've experienced over the past couple of years. Because I know the levels of addiction have, gone up significantly. People are experiencing addiction that might have never run up against it before. And, I remember I attended one of the conferences that you moved online, and I had thought since things really started to take off with the pandemic, about everything that you had shared about trauma, about being in this kind of prolonged periods of stress, about isolation, about being dysregulated, and then just like, how has it been first of all, how has it been for you? And what have you observed with everything that you know about this work?
It's unprecedented, right? And I guess that's the only word I can use. It's really wild, because there's a piece of this that is, of course, precarious It's unique. There's a piece of this that is also very precious, right? There really is. So it's that and, again, it's all of those things. And part of this, for me personally, has been expanding my capacity to hold opposites, to hold that and, right? And working to keep the container big enough to hold all this confusion, right? To hold all of these things, to hold this big and I know life is precious, and I know life is beautiful, all of those things. And, you know, 100,000 people OD'd in the United States. 100,000 is 28% increase over the 12-month period from the previous year. I mean, it's off the charts. It's just crazy. It's just unbelievable, unbelievable. And I get it, because all of this is hard to hold. It's really, really hard to hold, right? So, you know, supporting people and myself as much as I can. It's important for me to do practices. It's important for me to stay connected. It's really important for me, and I see most people. I love what we always talk about in 12 steps and really in all the Y12SR meetings. This is one of those things, and working through this really for all of us is one of those things that no one can do for you. We all have to do our own work, but we can't do this one alone. We cannot do this one alone. I would assert there has to be community, right? There has to be community. And that isolation and all of those kinds of things, I know, lead me back down the pathway toward, you know, I'm going to find something for relief, right? And I know that pathway that I was speaking about earlier is still there, right? And when my nervous system is dysregulated, right, in that moment, just because of the way the brain works, I'll do anything to get relief. When everything's not online, right? My, you know, executive functioning is disconnected from my feeling nature, it's disconnected from my sensing nature, all of those kinds of things. When they're offline, right, the one that's going to take over is the one that's going to bring me back to a homeostasis, right? And a drink, a drug, numbing out on TV, all of those kinds of things, it works for a minute, right? But the part of the brain that knows about time is offline, right? So I'll do anything in that moment. So community and these tools are so important in order to support us in, oh my God, in an unprecedented time, right? There's, you know, pandemic, epidemic, one after the other, right? Mm-hmm. There's climate, you know, there's white supremacy. There is, I mean, it goes on, not just the vile virus itself, but it just goes on. And it's like, how do I hold the capacity, right? How can I expand the capacity to hold all this? And there's love, right? There's love, right? And I know the substratum of all this is love, right? Underneath it all, right? We just have to do the work, peel off the layers to get to the depth of the love. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's led me to wonder, you know, when it comes to addiction taking hold, is it environment? Is it genetic predisposition? Is it lived experiences like we're in right now? Is it relationships? Is it trauma, as you mentioned? How do you make sense of that? I think the genetic one too, you've taught me some interesting things about that. And like, you know, because we do see it play out in the family, but how do you understand, or, you know, could you share more about addiction?
It's always been this confusion for me when, you know, people would say, nature or nurture, right? And keep that like a binary, one or the other. And I've never understood that, right? Why not both? It really, from my perspective, from the lens through which I see things, it really is both, right? It's nature and nurture. So yes, things can be passed down biologically, right? I look at, we do these genogram things, right? And I look at how far back this runs through problematic use of alcohol has been a part of my experience through family for many generations, for many generations. And, I get it, some for really good reasons. There were horrific conditions from which they were looking for relief, right? And I get that. I get that, right? And in this genogram thing, one of the things that's been so in this work that's been so beautiful for me is once I learned that about my history with this, I was also able to show that to my grandkids. Now, my great grandkids are way too young at this point. But if I'm still around and we can have that conversation, I'm going to have that conversation with them too, right? To show how this is run through family from this graphic picture, right? To be able to say to them, just as I would if it were diabetes, just as I would if it were cancer, right? To be able to say to them, this runs through your family. Heads up, right? Heads up, right? I don't know if this is going to be you or any of those kinds of things, but know that there's a predisposition for this, just as we're looking down in this family lineage. I want to give you that information so you can choose and know that as you make choices in your life. I wish someone had done that for me, right? And I really did that with my grandchildren. One's the older ones. One is 30, another one is 28, and another one's 24, the older of the grandkids. And we've had this conversation. They've seen that, right? And, I don't know what's in their gene structure because I can't read genes, right? I know in science and neuroscience is talking about this thing called epigenetics, right? This whole idea that there are some things, the structure of the gene doesn't change, right? But whether a structure of the DNA doesn't change, but whether or not a gene gets turned on or off within that fixed sequence, science is proven can change, right? That there are some things that we can do and support that maybe that gene doesn't get turned on within that sequence. And I always say, I can't read genes, but when I look at my grandchildren, I see that their life looks a whole lot different than mine did, right? At their age, at the age that they are, maybe it doesn't have to get flipped on within them, right? And it's been a gift to be able to watch them do what they do with this information. But many of us have been, and those were secrets in our families, right? It was a big secret in my family, clear as day, but no one talked about that, or no one mentioned it, or no one spoke of it as a dis-ease or a disorder or any of those kinds of things. There was all the shame associated with that, right? And so this whole idea of taking the shame out of it, right? This or any, mental challenge, right? To treat this differently than the way that we treat it. Yeah, and that's a big one.
That's such a big one. And I'm glad you brought that up because the shame and stigma and the secrecy, that was something in entering the rooms of AA. It was like, why is this being kept a secret? It's brilliant. And it's also so beautiful to see people should know that there are people gathering in their cities at all hours of the day to support each other. It is so beautiful and inspiring.
Yes.
Do you see like that there's been a shift happening? I mean, you're obviously a huge part of pushing the conversation forward and reaching people with it. Do you think that we're slowly chipping away at the stigma and moving beyond that?
Yes, I do. Right. And I'm like you. I kind of had that same response when I first walked in the rooms. I'm like, oh my God, right? It was almost like, why didn't I know about this before? Maybe I would have thought about this differently or made a different choice or some of those kinds of things. Um, I get it, right? Why it was that way when this was formed, right? Goes back to 1935, right? And within that environment, you would lose a job. You would have all kind of stigma on family and all of those kinds of things. I get it, right? I get why it was the way constructed the way that it was. And it's some things have shifted, right? Things really have shifted in some ways. So I am much like you. I honor all the traditions. I honor everything about 12-step programs, right? I honor because they've been so, vital in my own and continue to be in my own healing. And right, I am all about, I'm for anything that's going to support someone and give them one more day, in this piece to come to some kind of healing and to walk toward their own wholeness and all of those kinds of things. So I am very much in favor of talking about my recovery and talking about the things that are supporting me, day by day in sustainable recovery. So, and I am seeing a shift in those things. I really am seeing a shift, and I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah, I completely agree. It definitely does feel like it's happening. It feels like in months like this, where more people are experimenting with sobriety for various reasons because dry January, all of a
Right.
sudden I'm starting to see a lot more conversations happening too.
I am too. I am too. Right. And I'm really, really supportive of all that.
Yeah, me
Yeah.
too. Absolutely. What about for people who are kind of witnessing in family members and don't really know how to go about those conversations? Because it's not just something that affects the individual, right?
You're right.
Because that's a question that comes up a lot, and it's definitely, there's the feeling of powerlessness there and
Right.
the need for surrender and all of that. So what have you, yeah, what's the best way to support yourself and someone else in that position?
Isn't that interesting? Yeah, because you're absolutely right. It is not it affects, really, ultimately, it affects all of us, right? It really affects all of us. What a lot of times that I will tell folks, if in wanting to have a conversation or approach someone who it's clear that there could be some problem drinking or problem using or something like that. I usually tell folks that there's, first get really in touch with what it is intentionally that they want to have happen in this conversation, right? Be really clear and just at a place of knowing what their intention is in this conversation. So ultimately that says take care of yourself first. Take care of yourself first, right? Get some understanding about the disease of addiction, if you think that that's where this is, or substance use disorder, or however it is that you want to frame that. And then what I often suggest is, inviting people into a conversation where, at some point you are able to express to them what you see, right? And it's simply from the perspective, right? I don't know if any of this is true. I'm telling you what I see through the lens through which I'm approaching this, right? I see that you wrecked the car. I see that you lost the job. I see that the relationships are out of order, right? All of these kinds of things. I hear this, right? From this I perspective. This is what I see. This is what I hear. This is, it's almost like nonviolent communication, that format in nonviolent communication. This is what I see. This is what I hear, all of those things. And then I usually end a conversation like that by saying, this is me and nothing's going to happen at all until you say so. And all I want you to know is that whenever you're ready, I'm here. That whenever you're ready, I'm your girl. I will walk you through what has to happen next and what's next. Whenever you're ready, I'm here, right? And then, you use the serenity prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, right? You can't change them. You can't, right? The yogis say we got 3 things we really got to work with, which I love this, right? And those are our thoughts, our speech, and our actions. That's all we got to work with. I can't control your thoughts, your speech, and your actions. The only thing I got to work with are mine, my thoughts, my speech, and my actions, right? So recognize that once I've done that, right? Once I've spoken about this is what I see, and let the person know, whenever you're ready, I'm your girl. I'll support you, through this, and I'll be there for you. And then it's the serenity prayer, right? And the wisdom to know the difference. There are things I cannot change, right? And then you take care of yourself. You really go back. It all comes back to taking care of yourself, because it's easy to lose yourself in all that, right? It's really easy to lose yourself in all that.
Absolutely. It's so powerful because it's so obvious in your delivery that it comes from such a grounded place of love. And, not having that prior education or understanding of how to approach those situations, it's very easy to act from a dysregulated place of fear. And I think it brings out a side of a lot of people that they just don't, that's not who they feel they are. It's not their most loving and compassionate self, but it just speaks to how much there is a need for this awareness and an education of it. So do you feel like this addiction work is essential knowledge and understanding for every human being? Because of how many people, do we know the statistics? How many people are currently impacted by addiction in some way?
My favorite question, Mary. My favorite question. And really, this gets us back to yoga and yoga sutras and yoga philosophy, right? And, I always assert there's a model that's spoken of in yoga called the kleshas, right? And the klesha model talks about how we get disconnected, right? And, speaking of this earlier, there are fragments out here, there, and everywhere, all these fragments. And it speaks to how we get disconnected. And the base of that model is called, as you well know, avidya, right? Vidya means knowledge. When you put the A in front of it without the line over it, in Sanskrit, it means not. So it means the opposite of knowledge. And it's not, oftentimes you hear it translated as ignorance. And I always think of it's not ignorance kind of like we usually think about ignorance. It's the ignorance that is, for me, the opposite of humility, right? It's that kind of, it's the ignorance that I'm not willing to say that I don't know what I don't know. I'm not willing to live with I don't know what I don't know, right? This avidya is misunderstanding. It's miscomprehension, right? It's all of those things. At its root, right? It's what the founders of the 12-step, I assert, is what the founders of the 12-step program call stinking thinking, right? Avidya is stinking thinking, right? And where it lives is between our two ears, right? And not to make that good or bad or right or wrong or any of that. In this human plane of existence, it just is, right? It just is. When we come into this plane of existence, right, pretty soon, by the time we're 7 months old, we get all this programming. We start getting all this conditioning, right? And the condition is like, you're a girl, so girls do that. Well, you don't come in here with the concept of girl, boy, or black, white, or we don't come in with that concept. That gets programmed, and all these things get programmed in. You act this way, you do this thing, you go to school and you belong here, you fit in this box of, I call what we're living in is the matrix. We're in the matrix, right?
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, you fit in this square in the matrix, and and the matrix is real. That's a whole nother conversation, but one I'd love to have, right? But it's that, right? It's that whole thing. And that's the human plane of existence. It's all this conditioning. So I assert that what Patanjali, in one part of the Yoga Sutras, to paraphrase, is that we're all conditioned to the way we process reality. We are all conditioned to the way we process, and all this programming gets done as a result of that. Race, isms, all those are programs. It's programming. And what Patanjali says, which at its heart, I believe is what the heart of the 12 steps are, right? Is that examining our conditioning is our ticket to freedom. Examining and that's what the 12 steps for me support. I assert that Dr. Bob and Bill W., and you do some research and you look at this stuff way back, they were dipping, they were in this stuff, right? They really were. There were all these stories about Bill W. even at Esalen, right? When all the stuff was going on with the human existence movement at Esalen, and Bill W. was there and in the midst of that kind of thing. I always think of the reason that there are 200 different kinds of 12-step programs, and there's a Clutterers Anonymous, there is a Hoarders Anonymous, there's actually a Racist Anonymous, and that excites me, right? Using 12-step principles to work with even systemic issues like racism or sexism or any of those kinds of things, because the principles are the same, right? And we do this work of the steps to examine how we're conditioned, right? It's all that stuff, right? That's what, 4-step, 5th step, 6th step, 6th and 7th step for real, right? That's where we do this examining of our conditioning. And Patanjali says examining our conditioning is our ticket to freedom, right? That's our ticket to freedom, right? I love that. So the answer is yes, right? Human. It's all of us, right? It's all of us.
I absolutely agree. And it's so empowering, to actually be willing to do this work and to look inward. And I think a lot of people go into 12 steps and the path of yoga, but the 12 steps, maybe it's trying to get alcohol or their drug of choice out of their life. And then it becomes this platform for so much more.
Yeah. I talk about this all the time. This is what oftentimes when we say I'm a grateful recovering person, right? I'm grateful. This is why, right? I don't know if I would have come to this, unfortunately I had to get body slammed in order to do it, but I don't know, for someone like me, I don't know if I could have come to it in any other way. So I don't suggest anybody take the path that I took to this. And I'm deeply, deeply grateful that this is, that's another reason I have no problem saying I'm an addict, I'm an alcoholic, I'm a codependent, da 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 da. Recognizing that all of those are a part of who I am, right? And through this integration work, what I also get to realize is that none of those define me, right? But I can't get to none of those define me until I first accept all the parts, until I do, or else there's this fight, right? There's this internal war that goes on, right? So it's coming in, accepting all pieces of myself, right? And all that's neutral,
I love
right?
that.
Isn't it great? I know, it's lovely. I'm so grateful, right? If I had to go through all that, I'm so, I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing in the world. It's so clear in defining purpose and all of those things. I'm doing exactly. If I had to go through all that to get here, I'm nothing but grateful today. I'm nothing but grateful.
And the way transformed everything that you've been through into like this incredible offering is, wow, what a gift.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I'm so grateful, so honored and grateful.
Well, I know you're also adding on. So, I've been reading all about the wisdom, your new addiction wisdom school, and the components that you're bringing in with guest speakers and integrating Ayurveda and more of what you've already been offering. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that? And also, I find it so inspiring that you are on this endless path of exploration. And because of that, the offerings keep expanding, and has learning yourself and committing to that path of exploration been a big part of your own recovery journey as well? Like something you would recommend? Is that part of the healing process? And then also, I just want to hear all about what you're offering.
Absolutely, positively. It's kind of like I said earlier, in the Yoga Sutras talk about this. This is Yoga Sutra, I believe it's 119, right? And it speaks to two kinds of yogis in the world, two kinds of yogis. And one is the extraordinary yogi, right? And that's like the Jesus and the Buddha and all those kind of things who come in here into this already at this elevated level, right? And then there's the ordinary yogi, right? And the ordinary yogi is really the person that's got to do the work, right? And keep coming back and keep coming. And I'm real clear today that that's me, right? I'm real clear. Maybe at one point before one of the relapses when everything was going good, I thought, that's why I don't say I am recovered, right? Because it's this ongoing process, right? It really is this. And, my teachers taught me, you can't heal what you don't acknowledge. And I want to be really and keep my everything, all parts of me geared toward healing. So I acknowledge all that stuff, right? And recognize that, again, like I was saying earlier, that none of them define me. So study and teachers and practice and using all those tools is really, really, really important for me, right? That's what keeps me, I would assert, keeps me on my one day at a time path. And so I have often been asked, right? We talk about all these things kind of like, and even in the training, I mean, the Y12SR training is a pretty intense, as you remember, 3-day training, right? Pretty intense 3-day training. And I always get asked about deepening, right? Okay, this is great. And it unpacks and all those kinds of things. But how you really deepen that? And the wisdom school comes out of this requests from others about, how you're really deep in this. And I'm super duper excited about it, right? It's 4 modules, and each module has a theme. Like the module 1 is called The Anatomy of Sustainable Recovery, right? And we're going to look at so much in that module, but the real focus of that module is neuroscience, right? It's our brain, right? And the whole theme of this is befriending our brain, befriending our brain. And I reintroduced to some work, and to really some new work. It was just, I would assert, a grace that brought me together with Dr. Jill Bolte-Taylor. And her work around this is phenomenal. It's a new way to look at the brain. And not new from, and she's a neuroscientist, right? Anyone who's not familiar with her, she wrote the book, My Stroke of Insight. And the thing was, as a neuroscientist, she had a stroke, right? And she's familiar with all these structures of the brain. She's done this work, an accomplished, acknowledged in her field, expert in her field. And she's watching herself as she goes through this stroke, right? And it took her like 8 years she lost the left side of her brain, right? So she lost her ability to read, write, speak, walk, all those kinds of things from this stroke. And it was this 8-year process to regain and really bring back online the left side. She's all on the right side of her brain, right? Which is the spacious, I speak of the right side of the brain is the portal to something bigger, right? However it is you relate to bigger energy, God, however you call that, source, that's that side of the brain, this completely spacious area of the brain. And she's all over there, but to live in the world, right, you need to have the left function in. And so part of her work is steeped in the process that she went through to bring the left brain back online. And out of that, she's developed this model of looking at the brain that involves 4 characters, right? And those for 2 on the left side, 2 on the right side. Now we know the left and right side of the brain, they mirror each other. The same structures are on the left and the right side of the brain, but they respond completely differently, right? Left side responds completely differently than the right side. So she's developed this work in this book called Whole Brain Living. And it was amazing because when I became familiar with the work, what I first picked up about it is that introduction that you love and that you were speaking about, that I introduced myself with. What I'm describing there really are the 4 characters. They're the 4 characters that she speaks to in the 4. I'm Nikki, I'm an MBA, I'm a yoga teacher, I'm the founder of Y12SR, all of that. That is left brain character 1, as she calls it, the executive functioning character, the one, and she invites us to give them all names and to be in relationship with each one of these, right? Character 2, right? And that piece of the brain is where addiction lives in the brain, right? In the limbic system of the brain, right? That character is addict. Character 2, left side, is on the left side. Addict, alcoholic, wounded child. That's where trauma lives, right? That's where trauma lives, right? And then you go over to the right side, there's a character over here, character 3, on the right side of the brain, who is fearless, absolutely fearless. And she was active in this thing in addiction to fearless. She loves to play. There's no such thing as it's spacious, and she's right side, right? And then there's right side character 4, right? Which is love. It's the expansive. It's where we go in meditation. It's that. And really that's what I'm describing when I describe I'm MBA, that's character 1. Addict, alcoholic, codependent, that's character 2, right? Character 3 is who I become when I describe my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren, right? I become a 5-year-old when I'm with my great-grandchildren. They think I'm the coolest thing that has ever lived on the planet because I become a 5-year-old. I'm in that space where it's just fun and play and, you know, all that space. And then I call where in meditation, this is, I love God, I love people, what I was describing, I love dogs, all that. That's this. That's that connection with something more, with something bigger, right? So I'm describing, and I've done that for years. It was well before I read this book or had any connection with that. And I realized that in program, that's what we call the committee, right? You know, the committee, right? The committee that lives on our hand. And what if we could have a committee that is harmonious? What instead of if our whole brain works together, right? The committee's harmonious. They move in harmony because we need all of those parts. None of them are bad, awful, and wrong. We need all of those to be where we are. We're spiritual beings in this human existence, right? Which means we live in those two worlds. There are two worlds that we live in, right? What if we could walk in those worlds in with this harmony, right? And so bringing her in is just, it thrills me, right? She's gonna talk about whole brain living, and we're gonna talk about it in relationship to recovery and all of that. And in the first module of Addiction Recovery Wisdom School, we're going to go very deeply into that, what this means. You know, it has implications because, you know, what if the primary character I'm in the moment is addict, alcoholic, codependent, or wounded child, right? And my husband is, or significant other, or someone else is in their character 1, who's the order and dominant and let's get things done and I don't like it, right? It's going to be disharmony.
I think we can all relate to that at different ways.
Right. So how we shift from, you know, a place of disharmony to harmony, right? It's in befriending our brain. So it's brilliant work, and I'm so excited about it. And then the second module, we do work cognitive and somatic and trauma healing. We have that conversation from the basis of this whole brain foundation that hopefully we've laid. And in that module, Catherine Templeton's going to come in. And she's going to talk about Ayurveda. Like, I love the study of Ayurveda, right? For so many reasons. But she's going to come in and help us ground. We'll do some study around it, and then she'll bring her beauty and expertise in to help us ground more deeply in that. The third module is around integration. And in that module, Sean Corn is going to come in, right? And she's just the bomb, right? The love of my life, right? So she's going to come in and do some stuff around integration. And then the fourth module is Rolf Gates, right? So my friend, and you know, who's been in recovery forever, he's just wonderful. So he's going to come in and help us be part of it. And I'm just really, I think that this feels like next level work as far as deepening this stuff, so that you know, it really has the possibility to become a platform, right, towards sustainable recovery, right, toward one day at a time sustainable recovery. So I'm super excited about it. Yeah.
Oh, I love that so much. Yeah, I'm so, just reading about it just got me so excited. And you have so many amazing trainings, I know, recorded on the Y12SR website and class directory and all of that. So I'm going to link that for sure in the show notes, because you have offered so much wisdom in this episode. I know everyone's going to be excited. to find out where they can learn more. Is there anywhere else that people should look to engage more with you in your
Primarily,
trainings?
the website will lead people to wherever they need to go from there, right? I think the website is the best bet.
Okay, great. Well, Nikki, I just want to say thank you again. This has been, hearing you speak, I have to say it's the energy that you bring and how embodied you are when you share what you share is so powerful to me. And, you know, this episode has just been filled with so many important lessons. And thank you so much for being on.
Mary, like I said, for you, I'm always a yes. When I first met you, I just knew that you were the real deal, for real, for real. And so, I'm just honored and grateful and love being in the same space with you. It makes me very happy.
Oh, well, thank you. And I'll be on your training tomorrow morning, my time, evening, your time. So I look forward to seeing you again soon. But thank you so much. It was so good to see you.
I love it. Thank you.